Have you ever felt like you're stuck in a loop of negative patterns, as if you're living a script you never wrote? That strange feeling that no matter how hard you try to change, you keep falling into the same emotional traps, toxic relationships, or cycles of self-sabotage. If you said yes, you're not alone. And more importantly, it's not your fault. According to Carl Jung, one of the greatest psychiatrists in history, we are all secretly controlled by powerful and invisible psychic forces, archetypes. These are universal characters that inhabit the collective unconscious of humanity, and without realizing it, they take the reins of our lives. Jung called this phenomenon archetypal possession, when an archetype dominates our consciousness to the point where we live as puppets of an unconscious script. The suffering you feel when you fall into the same self-destructive patterns isn't because you're weak or incapable. It's because an archetype has taken control of your life. The good news? Today, you're going to discover exactly which archetype is dominating your existence, and, more importantly, how to break free from it so you can finally live with authenticity and purpose. This is your moment to reclaim control of your psychic and spiritual life. This is the moment of awakening. Think for a moment. How many times have you caught yourself acting in a way that later made you think, "That wasn't me," or felt like something inside you was making decisions against your conscious will? We've all been there. It's the universal experience of being overtaken by an archetype. Maybe you're the kind of person who always sacrifices yourself for others to the point of complete burnout, unable to say no, even when you're about to collapse. That's the martyr archetype running the show. Or maybe you're the one who always has to fix, rescue, and solve other people's problems while completely neglecting your own needs. The savior archetype has taken over, or perhaps you constantly feel unworthy, like you don't belong, and nothing you achieve seems to fill the void inside. That's the orphan archetype in command. The painful truth is that many of us spend our entire lives under the rule of these archetypes without even realizing it. We build careers, relationships, and entire identities based not on who we truly are, but on whichever archetype has taken control. And then we wonder why, despite all our external success, we still feel an inexplicable emptiness inside. Your suffering isn't because there's something fundamentally wrong with you. It's because an archetype has taken the wheel, and you haven't yet learned how to recognize and consciously integrate. That recognition is the first and most powerful step toward true psychological and spiritual freedom. Jung spent decades of his life studying these universal patterns of the human psyche. He discovered that archetypes are like fully formed personalities within our unconscious, each with their own desires, fears, and motivations. When one of them takes over, it quite literally starts running your life, pushing you to repeat the same destructive behaviors while expecting different outcomes. But what exactly are these archetypes that have so much power over us? Archetypes are primordial patterns or models that exist within what Jung called the collective unconscious, a deep layer of the psyche shared by all of humanity. They're not personal creations, but a universal inheritance born from the accumulated human experience over thousands of years. Think of archetypes as ancient psychic programs developed to help humanity survive and thrive. The mother archetype, for example, includes all aspects of motherhood, care, nurturing, protection, but also possessiveness and devouring control. The warrior archetype brings courage and determination, but can also manifest as reckless aggression. Originally, these archetypes served as crucial guides for human survival. The problem isn't with the archetypes themselves. They're essential and valuable parts of the human psyche. The problem arises when one of them seizes total control, when we become possessed by an archetype and lose our capacity for conscious choice. Archetypes operate through symbols, intense emotions, and behavioral patterns. They show up in our dreams, fantasies, irrational fears, and compulsive behaviors. The most dangerous part is that when we're under an archetype spell, we believe we're acting out of free will, when in reality we're just following an ancient unconscious script. This is the most subtle trap of the human mind. We think we are free when in fact we are being controlled by the oldest forces of the psyche. That's why we keep repeating the same mistakes, falling into the same patterns and feeling the same pain. It doesn't matter how many self-help books you read or how many therapy sessions you attend, if you don't recognize and consciously integrate the archetype ruling your life, you'll remain stuck in the same cycle. But how can you recognize which archetype is in control of your life? Jung taught that archetypes are revealed through emotional patterns that repeat over and over, no matter what you try to change. They appear in your thoughts, your fears, and even in the types of people you attract. If your relationships often end the same way, if your anxiety is always triggered by the same kind of situation, or if you keep sabotaging your success every time you're about to break through, an archetype is likely behind it all. The first step to freeing yourself is observation. But not just any observation, deep inner observation. You must become a kind of psychologist of your own soul. Watch yourself in moments of pain. What do you say to yourself? What stories do you repeat internally? Who do you blame? How do you justify your actions? These questions don't just expose your rational mind. They reveal the archetype speaking through you, and that's where the transformation begins. Once you identify the voice of the archetype, you create a space between you and it. You become capable of watching it, naming it, and most importantly, not obeying it blindly. This is the beginning of inner freedom. Carl Jung didn't believe in suppressing or fighting against archetypes. Instead, he taught the art of integration. The goal isn't to kill the archetype, it's to bring it into the light of your consciousness so that it stops controlling you from the shadows. When you recognize an archetype and relate to it consciously, you no longer serve it blindly. It begins to serve your growth. Imagine this. Instead of being consumed by the victim archetype, always feeling powerless and resentful, you begin to observe how it operates in your life. You listen to its pain without letting it define your identity. You express its wounds through art, writing, or therapy. You become a witness, not a hostage. And slowly this archetype loses its grip, transforming from a tyrant into a teacher. This process is what Jung called individuation, the journey of becoming a whole person. It's not about becoming someone new, but about recovering all the parts of yourself that were hidden, repressed, or possessed by unconscious forces. It's about becoming truly yourself, with all the richness and complexity that your soul holds. Now let me ask you something powerful. What if the pain you've been feeling isn't a curse, but a call? What if every moment of emotional suffering is actually your soul trying to get your attention? Every time you feel anxious, paralyzed, rejected, or empty, it could be the exact moment when your unconscious is knocking on the door saying, "It's time to wake up." This changes everything, because instead of trying to escape pain, you start to listen to it. Instead of numbing your emotions, you begin to decode them. And in this act of courage, of choosing to feel and understand rather than run, you start transforming the archetype. Pain becomes a portal. Your unconscious stops being your enemy and becomes your greatest ally. And that is the alchemy Jung spoke of, the transformation of suffering into gold, into wisdom, into self-knowledge. We are taught to fear pain, but Jung said something revolutionary. There is no coming to consciousness without pain. This phrase, powerful and raw, is a map for anyone seeking deep healing. We live in a culture obsessed with positivity, with quick answers, with illusions of control. But Jung invites us to do the opposite, to descend into the shadow, to embrace the unknown, to sit face to face with the parts of ourselves we try to deny, because only by looking at the shadow, only by touching the darkness, do we find our true light. So now I ask you, are you ready to begin that descent? Are you ready to recognize which archetype has been shaping your identity? Because the next step is even more transformative. It's not just about identifying the archetype, but learning to speak with it. That's right, speak with it. Jung developed a technique called active imagination. It's a powerful method of inner dialogue where you enter a relaxed meditative state and allow the archetype to take form through images, sensations, or even a symbolic character. Then you ask it questions. You let it speak. You write down the conversation. And through this process, something magical happens. The archetype starts to lose its dominance. It becomes a partner in your growth instead of a prison for your soul. In Tai, This dialogue, the soul begins to heal. And when you begin to heal, your entire life begins to realign. Maybe you've never tried to talk to your inner pain. Maybe no one ever told you that the sadness you carry, the fear that paralyzes you, the emptiness you feel at night are not enemies to be defeated, but voices to be heard. Each of these feelings contains a message, an invitation to understand something about your story, your wounds, and your soul. Carl Jung was not interested in superficial healing. He knew that true transformation only happens when you look at the source. That's why he developed the concept of the shadow. Everything you reject about yourself, everything you hide to be accepted by others, everything you repress because it hurts too much. And here's the great truth. Most archetypes that dominate us are hidden in this shadow. The victim, the persecutor, the abandoned child, the mask of the strong, the martyr, the invisible one, all. These archetypes thrive in the unconscious, feeding on your fear of looking at what hurts. And while you avoid looking, they gain strength. They whisper in your mind. They distort your perception of life. They sabotage your relationships, your self-esteem, your peace. That's why Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." But how do we make the unconscious conscious? The path is not quick or easy, but it is profoundly rewarding. It starts with presence, with the courage to stop running, with the decision to sit down with your pain and listen. You can start with journaling. Write down what you feel without censorship. Allow your feelings to come to the surface. Then ask yourself, who inside me is speaking? Is it a wounded child, a controlling parent, an abandoned partner? What do they want to say? What do they fear? This is how you begin to unmask the archetypes. Then, bring those voices to active imagination. Let the wounded character take shape. Maybe it appears as a figure from your past. Maybe it's an unknown shadowy form. Look at it. Listen to it. Ask it questions. You might be surprised by the answers. You'll discover that your unconscious isn't chaotic, it's symbolic. It speaks in metaphors, images, stories, and every symbol you bring into awareness becomes a key. Each insight you gain becomes a door. And with each door you open, you recover a piece of your authentic self. But be warned, this process requires honesty. It requires you to give up the masks, to stop pretending that you've got everything under control, to stop hiding behind perfectionism or superficial happiness. You must be willing to fall into the mystery of who you really are. Because the shadow isn't evil. It's just exiled. It's the part of you that never got to speak. It's the you that cried, and no one listened. It's the you that was angry and got punished. It's the you that wanted to shine but was told to stay small. When you welcome the shadow, you don't become darker. You become deeper. You stop being a puppet of your trauma and start becoming the author of your healing. And this is not only emotional, it's spiritual. Jung believed that integrating the shadow was a sacred act, a spiritual rebirth. Because when you stop dividing yourself between what is acceptable and what is shameful, you reunite your being. You come home to yourself. You access what Jung called the self, the true center of your psyche, where your conscious and unconscious meet in harmony. And do you know what happens when you reach the self? Peace. Not the superficial peace of pretending, but the real peace of authenticity. The deep silence of someone who no longer needs to prove anything. Of someone who has met their inner monsters and said, "You are part of me, but you do not control me." This is not theory. This is transformation, and it's available to you. You don't need to be a therapist, a philosopher, or a mystic. You just need to be willing to look, to listen, to feel. Because healing doesn't come from fixing yourself. Healing comes from embracing who you are with all your contradictions, pains, and forgotten parts. And from there, everything changes. Your relationships shift. Your sense of purpose deepens. Your intuition sharpens. And you begin to live, not as a fragmented being trying to survive, but as a whole soul learning to create. This is the gift of individuation. And it begins with a single decision, to stop running and start remembering who you are. Maybe you've already realized something important. Your pain is not random. Your wounds are not meaningless. There is a path behind every scar, a symbol behind every tear, a message behind every collapse. Carl Jung believed that the soul speaks through crisis, that what we call breakdown is in fact the unconscious. Trying to communicate what has been silenced for too long. Have you ever stopped to think that your anxiety might be a cry for freedom? That your sadness could be mourning for the parts of yourself you abandoned? That your exhaustion may not be from life being heavy, but from you carrying what no longer belongs to you? Jung's psychology invites us to look deeper, to stop asking what's wrong with me, and start asking what is my soul trying to say. This changes everything, because when you listen to the soul, you begin to align your external life with your inner truth, and that's when things start to shift. People who don't resonate with your essence fall away. Habits that were self-destructive begin to lose their grip. You no longer need to fit in to feel worthy, because you realize you were never broken. You were just asleep to your own light, and waking up is a sacred act. It's not always pleasant. Sometimes it's chaotic. Sometimes it feels like losing everything. But that loss is an illusion. What dies is the false self. What collapses is the persona you created to survive. What is born is your truth. The individuation process that Jung described is not a comfortable path, but it's the only one that leads to inner freedom. It's about saying no when you always said yes. It's about drawing boundaries even when it hurts. It's about choosing peace over approval. It's about realizing that your worth was never dependent on someone else's acceptance. And yes, it's about facing your inner contradictions. Because healing is not becoming perfect. It's becoming whole. It's realizing that your light and your shadow walk hand in hand, that your strength includes your sensitivity, that your clarity was forged through confusion, that your compassion was born from your own wounds. And it's in this wholeness that you find power, not the power to dominate others, but the sacred power of being yourself, the power of presence, of being in a room without needing to prove anything, of walking through life with integrity, of being able to say no without guilt and yes without fear. This is the silent power that Jung referred to, the power of someone who has touched the unconscious and returned, because those who return from the depths don't speak like others. They speak with the voice of the soul. They look at life with eyes of wisdom, and their presence becomes a healing space. This can be your path too. You don't need to change the world. You just need to stop betraying yourself. That's where it begins. Stop pretending, stop hiding, stop postponing your truth for tomorrow. The world needs your authenticity now, because when you align with your soul, you're not just healing yourself, you're healing everyone who crosses your path. You become a living permission for others to do the same. You don't even need to say anything. Your energy speaks, your gaze inspires, your silence teaches, and little by little, you transform the world, not from the outside in, but from the inside out, just like Jung taught. Have you ever felt like you were on the edge of something big, but couldn't explain it? Carl Jung used to say that before transformation, chaos always comes first. And it's not external chaos, it's internal. It's the feeling that nothing makes sense anymore, that the life you once built no longer fits, that the people around you no longer reflect who you are becoming, that your dreams have changed. Your body speaks in tired sighs, your heart pulses in silence, and you begin to feel that your old self is being dismantled. This is the moment of initiation, not a ritual with candles and robes, but the sacred and silent moment when the soul whispers, "It's time to wake up." You're not broken, you're shedding, you're being invited to remember who you are underneath the roles, the labels, the expectations, and the wounds. And it hurts because identity is glued to comfort. And now, nothing feels safe, but this uncertainty is holy. This inner emptiness is fertile ground for rebirth. You see, many people fear the void, but Jung taught that the void is not the absence of meaning, it's the space where new meaning is born. That moment when everything collapses is not your end, it's your soul being remodeled, and even if you feel alone in this process, you are not. Everyone who awakens walks through this darkness. Everyone who dares to be true must pass through the fire of their own lies. Everyone who seeks healing must first look at what hurts. It's not punishment, it's purification, it's Your life asking to be lived with truth. The world may call it crisis. Jung called it transformation, because it's in these dark nights that we find the most luminous truths, not in books, not in lectures, but inside, in the silence of your own honesty. In the moment when you stop lying to yourself, that's when the shift happens, when you stop blaming others for your unhappiness and start taking responsibility for your healing, when you stop running away from what you feel and start honoring your emotions, when you stop demanding answers from the outside and begin listening inward. And that, my friend, is the beginning of freedom. Not the kind of freedom sold on posters or preached by influencers, but the deep spiritual freedom that Jung spent his entire life studying. A freedom that begins when you say, I no longer want to survive pretending. I want to live with truth. That is the greatest act of courage, and it's the beginning of everything, because the moment you choose truth, you activate something ancient inside. Your soul smiles, your body relaxes, your path begins to open, and you realize it was never the world that held you back. It was the mask. It was the fear of being fully you, but now you're ready. Now you know that the pain was not a punishment. It was the portal, and the only thing on the other side is your real self. Carl Jung believed that healing isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you truly are, not the version shaped by trauma, not the personality built on fear, but the essence that has always been there, quiet, whole, waiting, and that essence, it speaks through symbols, through dreams, through intuition, through those little nudges that whisper, this isn't your path anymore. But we resist, because we've learned to silence the soul in the name of being accepted. We've learned to betray ourselves just to belong, to hide our pain, to fake a smile, to suppress our truth so we won't lose people. But the truth is, the more we betray ourselves, the lonelier we become, because no one can truly love you if you're not showing who you really are. So what do? We begin again. We start telling the truth, to ourselves first. We stop apologizing for our sensitivity. We stop pretending we're fine when we're falling apart. We begin to trust that the soul knows something the mind can't understand. And this is where Jung's brilliance shines. He showed us that the unconscious isn't a curse, it's a compass. Every repressed emotion, every rejected part, every pattern that repeats. They're not obstacles, they're messages, signals that something needs to be seen, heard, integrated. So don't run from your sadness, sit with it, ask it what it wants to reveal. Don't numb your anxiety, listen to the part of you that feels unsafe. Don't ignore your anger, let it teach you where your boundaries were crossed. This is shadow work. This is the alchemy of the soul, turning pain into purpose, turning confusion into clarity, turning suffering into awakening. And the path isn't linear. Some days you'll feel empowered, other days lost. But every step is sacred. Every tear has a purpose. And if you're listening, really listening, you'll start to see the signs. The right book will fall into your hands. The right conversation will echo what your soul has been screaming. The right silence will feel like a hug from the divine. This is not fantasy. This is what happens when you get out of your own way, when you stop forcing and start flowing, when you stop clinging and start surrendering, when you finally trust that your pain is not random, it's a teacher, guide, an initiator. And the moment you honor that pain, really honor it, it begins to transform, because now you're not running. Now you're present, and presence is the beginning of all healing. It's the doorway to truth. And once you walk through it, you'll never want to go back. Carl Jung didn't promise comfort. He promised transformation. And transformation, by its very nature, is uncomfortable. It's the tearing down of illusions. It's the death of who you thought you had to be. So something greater can emerge. Your true self. Not the one society rewarded, not the one you perform to feel safe, but the one who has always existed behind the wounds, behind the fears, behind the masks. This is why people fear the inner journey, because it demands honesty, it demands stillness, and in that stillness, we see everything we tried to avoid, but we also see what we forgot, our power, our wholeness, our divine connection. This is not about religion. This is about essence, about returning to what's eternal inside you. Carl Jung called it the self, the center of your being, the place where opposites unite, where light and shadow dance, where wounds become wisdom. And if you've come this far, if you felt something stir inside you while listening, it's because your soul recognizes the truth. You are not broken. You are not lost. You are awakening. And awakening is not a destination. It's a decision to see, to feel, to remember. And from this remembrance comes peace. Not the peace that avoids conflict, but the peace that can hold everything, pain, joy, confusion, clarity, and still remain centered. So if you're asking, where do I begin? The answer is simple. Begin where you are, right now, with the breath you're taking, with the feeling you're trying to suppress, with the question you've been afraid to ask, because the soul doesn't need you to be perfect. It needs you to be present, to be honest, to be real. So let this be the moment you stop abandoning yourself. Let this be the moment you choose yourself and trust that from this choice, everything changes, not instantly, but deeply, irrevocably, beautifully. This is the path Jung left us, not a map, but a mirror, so we can finally see who we truly are. And remember, the journey within is the greatest journey of all. Welcome home.